Guys, hope you're doing well. So I'm back with another video on Python, and today we're going to look at functions. So there's a lot you can do with functions, but I'm going to just introduce the basics. Hopefully you like it. Okay, so let's jump right in. So a function is basically a block of code, right? Let's say I want to call this block of code over and again in my Python program, right? So I want to call this, like, let's say a few times, and I don't want to just repeat the code, right? I don't want to have the same code or write the same code over and over. So what I would do is I would create a function and put this code inside it, and I would just call that function, right? So I'm sure, like, if you've been if you've been working for a while as a database admin or a sysadmin, or so if you've done some kind of programming, like shell scripting or whatever, Java, C++, I'm pretty sure you know what functions are. So let's actually let's try to use functions in Python actually. Okay, so all right, so now the syntax for uh, Python functions, right? So it basically looks like this. So I've got my REPL.it open. So REPL.it, if you're logged in, you will get a page like this. So you can choose an IDE based on what you want. So now I'm choosing Python. So it's giving me a Python 3.8.2 IDE. Okay, so now here's the syntax for creating functions. So you would have def as in definition, space, the name of the function, and parentheses, open and close. And you can have parameters inside it. We'll look at parameters a little later in this video, but this is a basic function, right? So once you have defined a function, you can actually call that function. So if you call the function like this, it will not work. It's just the name of the function, so you need to call it with the parentheses, right? So let's call it. There you go. So this basically calls the function and executes the block, the code block that is encapsulated by this function, right? So here it's just one line, but it could be multiple lines, right? So it could be complicated code. Okay, so the second thing I want to show you is how you can actually have like doc strings in the function. By doc strings, what I mean is you can have some sort of explanation at the beginning of a function, and this might be useful to new people who are trying to use this function. Like, let's say you're in a setting, you're in a company where somebody joins newly and they want to use your function. They can just they can do something like this, right? So they could just say help, and I want to use my function, right? So let's see what this let's try this. So now this shows that this is the function, and then it gives an explanation of what this function is. So you could put more details in it, as in what exactly this function is doing, what kind of parameters this function takes. So we could say something like this function does not take any arguments or parameters, right? So, and then run it again. So this is what the new programmer or developer will get, right? So now now moving on, right? So as mentioned before, we need functions for there's lots of benefits of using functions, but mainly this is the functions are useful for code reusability. Like I don't want to write the same code over and over again. So it's helpful for reusability. Let me just put it there: reusability, code reusability, right? And sometimes, like if you have like a large project or a program, you could actually split that program into multiple functions, right? So the second benefit is, like, basically, you can use functions to split the program into manageable small chunks, right? So these are the let's say we call it benefits of using functions, right? So all right, so what I mean by splitting the program into manageable small chunks is, like, let's say you need to read a CSV file, and then you need to clean up the data and load it into a database. You want to basically, you could have three functions: one for reading the CSV file, one for cleaning up the data that is coming from the CSV file, and another function for loading the data into the database, right? So that's a very high level example of like using functions, right? So anyway, all right, moving on. So let's actually look at a simple example. Like, okay, so let's say I have a function called after tax, and then it's got a print statement in it. So it takes the price of an item, and it basically adds the tax, and then prints the final price. So let's try to call this function. Let's say I want to the price of the item that we are the customer is buying is, let's say, $12, right? And let's see what this gives us, right? So I'm going to comment that one just so we're not getting confused with multiple outputs. Okay, so now we do that, and that's what the answer is, right? So basically, after tax, the price of the item is going to be $13.20, and we don't need such a big floating point number, but that's okay for now. Okay, so let's actually a function could also take multiple arguments like this, right? So price and tax percent, right? So here the tax is hard-coded. So let's say we could provide the percentage, the tax percentage, as another argument, right? So I'm going to comment this guy, and I'm going to actually call this function again. This time I'm going to say the price of the item is $12, and the tax percent is going to be 10%, right? So let's see what this. Oh yeah, so since we're using the same function name, the IDE is complaining, so we could comment this out. Okay, so now let's run this, and it's the same answer, right? One thing I want to mention is that, like, when you're passing variables like this, you can see that the 12 basically gets assigned to the price argument here, and then the 10 gets assignment to tax percent argument here, right, or the parameter here, right? So, and then we're not like really specifying which parameter is which. So we could actually, it's always a good practice to make that clear, right? So it's better if you put the parameter name, and this is basically going to give the same answer, print the same answer, right? So all right, so you could also have default values for your parameters right when you're defining the functions. So like here you can see that this price basically uh, it does not have any default value, and but this tax percent has a default value 10, right? So now this is a mandatory parameter now, but if the user skips providing an input or skips passing a value for this argument, basically he's gonna the 10 is going to kick in, right? That will be the default value for this tax percent. So if I just call like this, and we get the same answer, that's because 10 kicked in, right? Let's say I don't want 10 to be the tax percentage, so let's say I make it 20, right? Which is ridiculous. Who wants to pay 20% tax, right? But anyway, this is an example. So if I want 20% tax, then and we could pass we could pass the value here when you're invoking the function, and that will override the default value, right? So now let's actually run this, and that's gonna the value, the total, the final price is going to change, right? So this is somewhat like $14.40, right? Okay, so now one other thing is, so far we've been just seeing how a function is printing a certain value. We could also have functions return values. So instead of printing, we could return the value. The function could return the value, and you can capture that like in let's say have a variable called final price, and then you're calling this function with the same price equals 12, tax percent equals 20, and whatever this function returns is is assigned to this variable. Then finally you could print this final price variable, right? So there you go, right? So that makes sense. Okay, so that's how you return values from a function. If you don't specify let's say any value for return, then it will return none, and if you don't have a return statement at all, then also the function returns none data type, right? So you could do that. So now moving on, next thing I want to explain is this basically example where you could pass multiple arguments to a function. This is sort of like a flexible function, right? So let me show you the example, right? So here we have a function called multiply, and it's got this weird asterisk and some variable name, right? Some args. So let's basically, what this means is this function can take multiple values and actually call this function, and I'm going to pass 1, 2, 3, right? So these are we're passing multiple parameters, and that's going to convert into a tuple, basically pack into a tuple, and we'll see, right? So okay, now that makes sense. So the parameters passed in is this is the parameter 1, 2, 3. So even though I didn't pass a tuple, so it took it as a tuple, and we confirmed that this is of class tuple, so the object is of class tuple, right? And then we're doing some multiplication over here, right? So we're basically taking all these numbers and multiplying with each other, right? So then we're returning the answer, so which I'm not receiving any which is not being assigned to any variable. So we could do that, and let's actually print the result, right? Yeah, there you go. So that's the result is 6, and we could have more arguments like that, and that will also work, because so now all of this is getting converted into a tuple, right? And then which is processed by this for loop, and each number is multiplied with each other, like 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5, sort of like 5 factorial, and that's the answer you okay, so that's the answer you get, 120. So now you could also have variables or parameters with 2 asterisks, right? So let me show you an example. So we could have a function like this that takes a parameter with 2 asterisks and some name. So this could be any name, but I'm using KW args, that's keyword args. So anything that's passed into this parameter is basically packed into a dictionary. So that's called dictionary packing. So, and then we could just use this variable like you would use a dictionary, right? So, and that's what I'm doing here. So a dictionary name dot items, and then I can iterate over that, right? So let's try to pass some values into, or let's call this function first, and let's say I'm actually passing a variable called, let's say, value 1 equals 1, and value 2 equals 2, and value 3 equals 3, right? So now all of this is going to be converted into a dictionary, or packed into a dictionary, and you will see that when I print the variable over here, and then I'm checking the type of the variable, right? And there's some, you just print K and B like that, you don't have to format the string. And you can see that this time it printed the dictionary, so all these values are converted into a dictionary, and then it's confirming that it is of class dictionary, and then it goes through the key value pair, which is value 1 1, value 2 2, value 3 3, right? That's a dictionary packing, right? So I will leave you with one last thing in this video, which is, so we could also pass functions around. So that is called first class function concept. Actually, basically you can use a function like you would use a variable. So let me give you an example for that, right? So here you have two functions called say and say twice, and it takes message as input, and then it prints the message, right? And I have a wrapper function, which basically takes a function as the parameter. It takes function parameter itself, right? And then we basically declare or initialize this variable, and we call this function, whatever function is passed into this, with this string variable, right? So when I call wrapper underscore func, which is this func, and pass this function name, and this function is going to be called, because this is the parameter, right? This is the parameter that gets passed in. So for some reason it's not running. It might be my internet issue. Okay, finally we got the answer, or we got the output, which is hello, right? And instead of passing the say function, if I pass the say twice function, now that's going to return hello twice, because now this function is passed into this wrapper function, which is called here with the hello message. So hello message is printed twice, right? So those are a few of the basic things that you can do with functions in Python, right? I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe, share, and like my video. Share it in your Facebook page, your LinkedIn page, everywhere. And if you have any questions, please post them in the comment section, and I will see you on another video very soon. Thank you.